welcome. Happy Friday. Today is Friday, December the 10th. This is Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers, episode number 137. The snow is melting outside, as you saw in the opening today. And it got all the way up to 46 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 8 degrees Celsius. 60s tomorrow, so there's going to be a big snow melt off, and this is a prime time if you live in this area or somewhere where it's going to suddenly get warm here in December for an oxalic acid vaporization treatment opportunity. So I hope you're all having a great week. I took care of my mouse problem yesterday. Collect them all with live catch trap. Anyway, the questions that were submitted are turned in via my website, fredsfinefowl.com, or thewaytobe.org, or you can comment down in the comment section below a video, or you can also look down in the video description for other links and more information about topics we're going to talk about today. Because thanks to a lot of the questions that were turned in, I had to do some research. That's right. You want to learn something? You should teach it. That's right. It's a great way to learn. So we're going to have hot weather here, big melt off, unusual for us here in northeastern United States, state of Pennsylvania. People always ask where I'm located. So this is the way to be, and I'm glad you're here. First question comes from CBBs. Hi Fred, follow up on the question from last week. Would you place fondant on a colony that is nearly honey-bound? I had a colony die of starvation in May, despite all the blooms, because it was so dry this year, thankfully. It's already rained more this fall or winter of 2021 compared with the fall or winter of 2020, so just don't want to see another colony starve. Not sure if honeybees store fondant in cells or they eat it and simply saves them from tapping into honey and open nectar cells. So there's a lot in that question actually. But it is frustrating for people and brand new beekeepers in particular because you get a false sense of security sometimes. When you go through your first year of beekeeping, you got your bees, they're all young, your queen is less than a year old, and you go into winter and you got honey off them the first year, even though everybody told you that you wouldn't, and everything just seems great. And then that first year they come through spring and everything's fantastic, everything does well. Well, that's because a lot of things happen in a beehive as the colony ages. So your first couple of years can look pretty smooth sailing. And then comes the downward slide. This is why over 80% of brand new backyard beekeepers, because that's our target audience, backyard beekeepers, they quit. 80% of them quit in the first 2 years of beekeeping. And that's because it looks okay at the beginning, but then things get complicated, and then you end up on YouTube looking for answers to your questions. So first of all, let's talk about the fondant. By the way, I was outside checking fondant today, and hopefully I'm putting a video up right now that shows the fondant being chewed by the bees. It was very interesting. So what fondant am I using? It's the Hive Alive fondant that just came out this year. This is my first winter with them, and I'm using them on 50% of the colonies out there. And let me tell you what I already wish I was doing. I already wish I put Hive Alive fondant on all of my colonies because they're using it already. Some have just chewed a tiny little hole up through it, and you can see because there's a plastic casing on it that you can see through, and the bees come right up inside from underneath, and they're not venting off that valuable warm air. So the question is, would they use the fondant and store it in the cells? Generally they don't. Just like dry sugar, just like a sugar brick, whether you're using the mountain camp method, which is where you put newsprint over the top of your frames and you sprinkle sugar on that and you got little slits in it. Some people spray it with water to solidify it a little bit and stuff like that. It is just a sucrose resource that the bees need. So why use sugar? Why use fondant? What's it going to do for your bees? Well, it's emergency feed for starters. So does that mean my bees are already up in their emergency resources? Well, one colony is digging into them. They've eaten probably a 3-inch diameter hole into the fondant already. But that was the most advanced colony, and here we are just after the first week of December, so we're in the second week of December, and our goal is we got to get them into February and March where they can start to get new resources from the environment. So they're using stored honey, and I'm going to get to this, right? This is what happens. Beekeepers all get together, they go to IHOP, where we gather during the week to talk about bees. And for those of you who aren't from the United States, it's the International House of Pancakes. Great place to go, by the way. So anyway, your bees cluster, 8-frame, 10-frame box, doesn't seem to make a difference, right? The bees cluster in the middle, and then they move their way up through the resources. So then what happens is they leave behind these other resources. Frames in the 1st and 10th position, for example, that can be loaded with honey, and your bees don't touch them, and then they end up jammed right into the cells, and they appear to be starving. How do you know when you look at your bees when they're out on the landing board, for example, as I showed in the opening today, because they were flying today because it was warm enough? How do you know if they're healthy? You look at their abdomens, you look at their fully extended. If they're extended, they're full. It's just like a bunch of people on Thanksgiving with their belts undone and they've eaten too much, you know? So they have a lot of resources. On the other hand, if you look at the bees and their abdomens are truncated, contracted, now we have a problem, and it's advanced, right? So the goal is for your bees not to ever get to that point. So fondant on top, what's the difference between fondant and sugar by itself? Sugar is sucrose. Fondant is already inverted, so it's referred to as invertase sometimes. So that's fructose and glucose, which means the molecules are small enough and the sugar has already gone through a process that makes it available for immediate metabolization of that sucrose for your bees. So it removed a step. So you can use dry sugar or fondant. Fondant's going to cost you more, of course, but if it comes in those cool packs, and there are other things added to the fondant sometimes. So there's a lot of claims made about how it's going to benefit your bees. You're going to come through spring better. The reason I'm using Hive Alive fondant this year is to help with nosema. Nosema spores that build up in your bee guts during wintertime when they can't fly and they can't get rid of the resources, the waste material that builds up mid-gut, hindgut, and then out. That's why they need to do cleansing flights. So it's kind of interesting too because not a lot of them were leaving little tan stains in the snow, so there weren't a lot of desperate bees getting out. So we've had some odd warm weather tomorrow. It's going to rain, but you can bet if they need a cleansing flight, they're going to be able to fly out and eliminate and come back to the hive. They're also cleaning house, dragging out dead bees. The last of the drones, the male bees, are also being tossed out. But they're active, so a warm-up like in the 60s lets them access other parts. The cluster will loosen up a little bit. They're still clustered in the low 60s, however, but they'll use more of the resources in the hive and then they'll contract again. Now, if they get all the way up into the top and you're using your fondant and things like that, that's immediate consumption. So they do spread it around through trophallaxis, which is where one bee goes up into that fondant and they collect a lot of it and they use water inside the hive to metabolize that. They need water. And then they're going to come down and other bees are going to stick their tongues out. So the receiving bee sticks its tongue out and it'll start drawing those resources from the bee that went up into the fondant and collected a bunch of that. So they're like water boys, you know, at a football game or something. They make sure that all the other bees in the cluster don't have to leave the cluster depending on what their job is in there. And they get resources brought to them. So the heater bees and things like that. So that's pretty much it. And so if your bees die off this time of year, if you've already got a dead out, by the way, it was funny because I was out looking at all the hives today and I marked one dead December 1st because there's no activity. They hadn't touched anything. You know, you had emergency feed up on top. They weren't touching it. They were flying like crazy today. So they're not dead. Don't judge them early. And if you think, this is a classic beginner mistake, if you think your bees are dead, leave the hive alone. Don't open the hive. Don't pull the inner cover because you just have to know because you just want to see. Leave them alone because you have nothing to be gained by knowing that they're dead. You have everything to lose if it's a small cluster. And you're the one that delivers them a gust of really cold air, which could chill the brood and other things like that as well. So, not sure if the honeybees store the fondant in the cells. They don't. Or they eat it and simply saves them from tapping into honey or open nectar cells. It doesn't save them from doing that because they tend to do both at once. The bees that are on the cluster down below, they're on the honey, the capped honey, and they're going to remove the caps, they're going to consume it, and that honey is warmed by the cluster for consumption. And then those cells get used in turn for winter brood rearing. So it's kind of those things are all going on at the same time, and the bees that are up getting the fondant are assisting those that are in the cluster, which are at the same time consuming your stored resources. So there you have it. Question number 2, moving on. This is from Ty Huntsberger, Quakertown, Pennsylvania. How many times a year and when do you check for varroa mites, and is the sugar shake the only method you use? Okay, well, different times of the year we check for varroa mites, of course, and I like to do it every 2 to 3 weeks minimum. Don't do that this time of year, of course, because they're already buttoned up for wintertime. So it has to be in sync with weather and stuff like that. But why the 2 to 3 week interval? And the reason is I'm not just checking for varroa mites, and I'll get into whether or not I do the sugar shake or something else. And that's because it depends upon what I see in the hive. So we look to see how healthy they are. We look to see if their brood is healthy, if there are no brood disorders and things like that. This is a great opportunity for your mentor to come over and look at your hive with you, let you do the inspection, but then point out indicators and ask questions so that you'll know that there are either things are going really well or they might not be. So I do that every 2 to 3 weeks because if you find out that you haven't looked at a colony, and this has happened to almost everybody, if you haven't looked at a colony for more than 3 weeks, what could have happened? Well, you could be queenless and you didn't catch it. So what happens at the end of the 3rd week? Those female worker bees in there have the opportunity now to activate their ovaries and become laying workers, and that magically seems to happen at the 3-week mark because first they miss the queen pheromone and it starts to dwindle, and that happens pretty fast. They realize that they don't have a queen almost right away, but their ovaries can't be flipped on like a light switch, right? So they begin to build and they begin to activate over a period of 3 weeks, which they can also reverse that and they can shut that down again. It's part of being a eusocial insect, is that they abandon their own reproductive capability to support another bee, usually the queen, that is laying eggs, and then they support her. In the absence of the queen, they take on the duties of producing offspring. What kind of offspring do they produce? Drones only. So beyond 3 weeks, so if you wait until the 3rd to 4th week to inspect your colonies, you could have missed that. You could already have a laying worker and your problems are compounded. That's why my magic number is 14 to 21 days for inspections. Now the other part of the question was, do I use sugar shake or do I use other methods? So it depends on what's going on. I prefer the sugar shake. So if everything else is equal, everything looks good, brood patterns are good, they're queen right, I've seen the queen, or I've seen eggs, or I've seen evidence of everything looking good, I'll do a sugar shake, okay? Because it's easy, don't kill the bees. And I want to get the bees that are on the open larvae. So the open frames of larvae is where you'll get your highest numbers of mites. So the sugar shake is what I do for that. If by some mistake, by some oversight, I happen to collect the queen in my sugar shake thing and I dump them out after I've counted the mites and stuff, dump out the bees, now I've not killed the queen. So I can put them back. They're a little upset. They're not super happy. They have to be cleaned up by the other bees because they have powdered sugar on them, but if the queen's in there, she can still make it. If I do an alcohol wash and I make a mistake and I get the queen, that's why you got to really keep an eye out for the queen if you're going to do an alcohol wash because you're going to kill them. Or I like to use Dawn Ultra dish detergent. Got a little bottle of it right here. This, based on Randy Oliver's studies at scientificbeekeeping.com, releases the mites from your bees quicker than even isopropanol does. So I went to that this year. And when did I use it? When I had an issue with brood in the horizontal, the long Langstroth hive, so I wanted to move fast. And Dawn dish detergent moves quicker than if I did the sugar shake and stuff like that. So I already had a brood problem. I wanted to move fast on that. I needed to know, do I have foul brood or anything else? So I did an immediate mite count with the isopropanol or Dawn Ultra dish detergent. And I had a high mite count. So they were stressed. Their brood had sac brood and bald brood and chewed brood, and the bees were uncapping the brood, which is a hygienic trait also. If they're a varroa and a developing pupa, then they'll chew the cap off so they can access the varroa and or expose it. Anyway, so I had those problems, so I went to something faster, and that's an opportunity to use isopropanol or something that actually kills the bees, but to get a quicker mite count and a more complete mite count. Your numbers tend to be a little higher with the isopropanol, your kill treatments, than they do with powdered sugar. So that's 2 questions answered on that one. Now we have George Garcia. And we had some good questions this week, by the way. So George Garcia says, wonderful video. I was wondering if you can discuss the double screen boards used to split hives. A 2-brood box is split into 2 colonies. Can they be used in reverse to combine a weak and a strong colony without newspaper? Will the 2 colonies smell the same so that they can be simply combined by removing the double screen boards? Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit about what the double screen board is, what it was designed to do, who designed it in the first place. Some people call it the Snell Grove board, and that's because L.E. Snell Grove in 1935 developed it. He also developed the Super Bee Escape board, that triangle one that we all use. That's still been around forever. So Snell Grove was a kind of a genius, but what was his point? Swarming, its control, and prevention. That was his book. So if you want to look it up, by Snell Grove, 1935, that's what it was about. So he was using the double screen board, which was modified from his Bee Escape. And he used that as a swarm prevention tool. So it's not really used in its original design to combine colonies of bees. But let's say we wanted to do that. So double screen board. Why is it double screen? Not single screened anyway. So you could just put a queen excluder in there, put screen on the queen excluder and use the queen excluder to give it support, and then just put number 8 screen on there. Now we have a single layer of screen, but the bees can pass through the queen mandibular pheromone. That's called QMP for short sometimes. And so this is how the queen communicates that she's fertile, that she's laying, that life is good in the hive, and all the bees, her retinue of bees that are attending to her, are licking the queen constantly. They're sticking their proboscis out, they're feeding the queen, and they're also receiving material from the queen. In return, those bees run around and through direct contact, they spread the queen's pheromone through the colony. This is why really huge colonies of bees have a weaker sense of the queen's presence, because they've gone through thousands and thousands of bees spreading out the queen's pheromone and making sure that they all understand that they're queen right. So it's physical contact. So what happens is the double screen board. So how much space do you need between the screens, right? Snell Grove has schematics. So if you look up, and I'll give you a link, by the way, in the video description down below, which will take you to his actual book from back then, and there's a schematic of his double screen board so you can look at it. And all it has to do is prevent the bees from reaching each other, touching each other's tongues, right? Because they should not be able to transfer the queen's mandibular pheromone to one another. And so what happens is, with the double screen boards, you're not actually preparing a colony above to be combined with a colony below. Because if the plan is to combine the two, a weaker colony on top, stronger colony at the bottom, if the plan is to combine them, then you want them to be able to have the physical contact. You want them to be able to start to spread the queen's pheromone through there, because now we do want them to blend without a huge fight. But the best way to do that, because you won't have to get back into the hive again if you use this method, because with the Snell Grove double screen board, you have to pull your hive apart again later if you're going to combine the two. So if you can just put newsprint on top of the strongest colony, which is the base, put that on top, cut little slats in it so that airflow goes through there and everything else, then you put your smaller colony that you hope to combine, and then you let them chew through the paper and they'll start to tear through it. And they actually can combine remarkably fast that way. But it provides a barrier, slows it down, the workers start to get to know each other, they start to spread the queen's pheromone. Usually the colony that you're combining is a queenless colony. If you have two queen right colonies and one of them just happens to be small, you'd be way ahead to remove the queen from the smaller colony. So don't introduce, although some people throw both in there, the weak colony with their queen, and they let those queens fight it out. I think that's kind of risky business. But if you've got a queen-right colony down below and they've got eggs and everything else going on, which is the whole point of why you're adding one that's not performing well at the top of that, then they tend to combine very easily because the pheromones are so strong, and your bees are happy to get a queen if they're missing their queen. So I don't like letting them fight it out. So the only reason that I combine them in the first place would be if I had a weak colony without a queen. Like they're just, and no laying worker yet, because that's another issue on its own that we talked about earlier. But that's what they do, but you can use it for a lot of different things. I don't use it the way some people do, to combine weaker colonies with stronger colonies going into winter, for example, for wintering over. Because I like my weak colonies to kind of go it alone. If I have a strong colony that's done really well on its own, I don't want to add another weaker colony, because generally what they have up above is a lack of stores and resources. So if they haven't been hot shots going into the fall, those are genetics that you may not necessarily want around. So then people just say, well, what about the workers? I want to save my workers and everything, and I want to combine them. Well, when you combine them, you just provided a bunch of empty space up there as well. Unless you are condensing down the hive and you've got solid resources of honey and everything up there. Because when you do that, we put those hives together. Let's say you did it anyway. You put those hives together. What you did is you just created a large colony that was doing well on their own, and instead of having a nice insulated inner cover, which is what I prefer now, and then an insulated outer cover, you took those two things off. You put a double screen board on, and now they're venting up into the smaller colony that you put on top, and then on top of them, they get the inner cover and they get the insulated outer cover. And so these underdogs up there are going to benefit from the heat rising through the double screen board, right? So that means they have to heat less. I understand. Great. You know, I used to live in a 3-story Victorian house in Connecticut. And I had the middle floor, so it was divided up. Apartments on the first floor, middle floor, and then what they called the penthouse apartment up above me. So the apartment above me, they never had to use their heat, because this was a house from 1840 something. And so the insulation was not great. So the people above benefited from all our heat. So what did we do through the wintertime? We paid more for our heat, although the first floor apartment had the worst of it because they had heat. I benefited from them because their heat rose through my apartment, and then so on. But the furnace had to run a lot for the lower apartments. It's no different for your bees. So when you've got the big box at the bottom, and it's big colony bees, and their passive heat from their cluster rises through that and benefits those up above who were underdogs in the first place, who never earned their way. Not making any analogies there, but what happens to the lower colony? They work harder. They burn more calories and resources, and when they work harder, they don't live as long. So the bees that have to heat and work harder to generate heat that they're losing constantly through the double screen board, and this is in the northeastern United States, so heat conservation is more important to me than saving a small cluster of bees that wasn't otherwise going to make it on their own. That's why I don't use them. And then so there are a lot of things to do to combine them at a different time of year. It could be a useful tool, you know, if you're trying to boost the colony, if you're making a split, which is L.E. Snell Grove's intention for the board to begin with. It's so that you could reduce swarming in the spring. In fact, there was an interesting quote here. Snell Grove wrote, "Apart from bee disease, swarm control still remains the greatest obstacle to successful beekeeping." And that's why he created the Snell Grove double screen board, so he could split the colony, and he had these entrances on 3 sides, upper entrance and lower entrance, so he could change it out, right? So the bottom colony, which is where the queen would be, and then you split the resources and created a second colony that's queenless, right? So they're going to be rearing a new queen upstairs. Now you have a double screen board, and you've got double openings, one below, one above, right? So, and they're on 3 sides of it. So then what you do is you provide an entrance for your upper colony on one of the sides, 90 degrees out from the lower box's main entrance. And that's so that your bees fly out a side that they recognize, they come and go back and forth, right? But now, Snell Grove wanted to give you an opportunity to fortify your upper colony, remember the one that's building a new queen, and you're reducing the numbers down below, so you're taking away one of the swarm triggers, which is a heavy population of bees in spring, right? So he would open, here's your double screen board, the bottom entrance for your lower box would be open, so it looks like an upper entrance and a lower entrance on the same hive. Your forages are out, they're coming and going through that upper, lower entrance that you control. You open or close it. Now a bunch of foragers are out and they're getting all the resources, pollen and nectar, spring flow is kicking in, and you close the bottom one, you open the top one. So now this top colony has a side entrance and a front entrance that your bees are using. So these foragers come back, they fly right to that spot which would have taken them into the lower box, and where does it take them instead? Into the upper box, bringing resources, nectar, pollen, and everything that those bees up there need to build their brood. So this was a way of dividing the foraging force and removing some of the numbers from the lower box and fortifying the numbers of bees in the upper box. So it was used for swarm prevention, not a winter survival mechanism. So it's very interesting if you want to read Snell Grove. He's a very detailed fellow. But if you want to read all of his methods for swarm control and intervention, that's where it comes from. So for me, using them as a preparation for getting your bees to combine for blending colonies, it's a no-go because it really doesn't prepare them. Plus, again, you have to pull everything apart once they get started. So I like to use the newsprint method from up above, get them down below, and save your double screen board for a swarm control, swarm prevention, and building of new colonies together in spring before the nectar flow offsets swarm tendencies, removes some of the triggers, creates a new queen, strengthens a brand new colony of bees, and then you take them apart and you move the strong base colony to the new location, and you bring the upper colony down on a normal landing board, and the double screen board gets removed, and boom. There you go. Fortified new colony, strong overwintering colony, all doing great in your same apiary, and that's what the board is intended for. So I hope that was helpful. Oh yeah. This is not what Snell Grove's exactly looks like, but that's what we're talking about. Entrances here on three sides, screen through the middle, double screen so they can't have direct physical contact. And that one sells for $25, $24.95. So if you're looking to get those and you want to play around with them, that's what they're for. Question number 4 comes from Keith Spellman. How do you feel about clipping the corners of the foundation to create pass-throughs for the bees? Thanks as always. Okay, so that question comes from the fact that we have plastic foundation, right? So this is a one-piece, heavy waxed acorn foundation and frame combination, right? So what's good and bad about it? First of all, what's good about it is they last a long time, they're easy to clean, and they prevent wax moth larvae from chewing through, so pests and stuff have a hard time getting through them, and they're going to last and last. And these don't deflect, they're very good. Bees draw them out, they get through extractors very well and everything else. So what's the downside? Downside is if you're doing things like I am with the horizontal long Langstroth hive, the bees, if they want to move laterally through your hive, they have to go over the top bar, which there is space for them to do that. In a lay-ins hive, there's no space over the top for them to travel from frame to frame. They can travel around the sides, they can travel underneath. But I do, when I'm using the insert foundation, I do cut the corners, top, right, and left corners of the insert, bottom, right, and left corners of the insert. Now, if you have a frame like this and you can't clip off the corners, what can you do? You can take a 3/8 inch drill bit and you can drill holes through the corners, top and bottom, and then they can either leave that open or they can decide to close it up with beeswax if they want to. So with any kind of frame, whether it's just a foundation where you clip the corners Acorn foundation comes with it already perforated, so you can snap them off, but I just use big tin snips and I clip the corners and then I put them in the wooden frames and off you go. So you can also drill holes in these, and if the bees don't like it, you know what kind of comb they put in there? Drone comb. But especially with the horizontal hive configurations, if you're using a long lang or something like that, I highly recommend you clip those corners and let the bees wax them up if they want to, or leave them open. And if you look at one of my videos showing the horizontal long lang hive inspections, you'll see those openings through there, so they actually kept it. So it's pretty good stuff. So yes, clip corners. If it's a one-piece plastic frame, highly recommend. If you only wanted to put 2 drilled holes in it, the top right and left corners are good to go. Now, this one, Ross Millard. Thanks for this question. And it's because I had to do a lot of thinking about this. This is not a out-of-the-box, off-the-cuff thing that I could just answer. I had ideas, but anyway. I have a question concerning the Lands hives. For those of you who don't know, Lands hives or horizontal hive, they have deep frames. They have a unique frame that's unique to the Lands configuration. They're not set up for any hive top feeding. They're not set up for a lot of different things, but because they're unique, we get in a pickle as beekeepers when you're trying to fortify your existing frames with some other frame material, because nothing is being made for the Lands hives here. You can buy your Lands frames waxed from Dr. Leo at horizontalhives.com. He has no idea who I am. I get no kickbacks from that. But if you go there and buy something, tell him I sent you so that you can pay the same as everybody else. So anyway, it says you talked about taking comb from a Langstroth hive and turning it 90 degrees. I was considering doing the same thing with foundation, but I noticed the orientation of the hexagons on the frames would be different. Do bees build comb in the same orientation as the foundation, with 2 of the 6 sides running vertical as opposed to running horizontal? Does the orientation of the foundation imprint matter? So what do you think I did? Of course, went down the rabbit hole that engineers have been going down for forever. And I had to get into all the things about, see, what we're talking about is if this were a medium frame, right? For the Langstroth, this is the standard width, fits all the boxes. You just choose deep, medium, or shallow, but the length of the frames remains the same and everything else. So, but now with the Lands hive, the Lands frames do not match these. So some people take medium depth frames, they turn them on their sides and they run them into the Lands frame. And now you've got comb that has a different pattern because the hexagonal cells here, maybe you don't know the orientation of those, so maybe if I did a sketch, right? So you're going to see how far down the rabbit hole I went, also that we could answer this question from Ross Millard. So anyway, this is what the bees build. This is the hexagonal comb that they construct. It is an engineering marvel, which is why you see it in everything from aircraft to ballistic shielding to anything that needs to be really strong with a minimum amount of material. That's why the bees get so much credit for being nature's greatest engineers, because they use the least material for the maximum strength, right? So we look, just for example, right? If you had a load going straight down on this vertical piece of beeswax, right, it would hit these 2 pieces at an angle and distribute this downward force equally to both sides. Then we have another wall of the cell, which also gets loaded from up above and stabilizes this going down. But then the downward pressure hits these 2 cell walls and equally distributes that downward pressure there. And then it goes over here and on it goes, and it just recycles. It is a perfect design. When you take your frames and you flip them 90 degrees, what do you get? This configuration. So now we have this flat bottom to the cell wall. Structurally, is this going to be as good as the way the bees build it? And of course, we know that the bees build based on gravity, right? So it will not be. It will be inferior structurally, because now we have an unsupported horizontal surface here that's not transmitting its load to either left or right, but has the potential to sag through the middle. Will the bees use it? Yeah, they still would. So, but it led me down, trying to figure this stuff out. And so look at it this way. Then when we turn the frames sideways and we do a cutaway, the other thing that comes into play here is they're angled, right? We have a 13 degree from the horizontal axis, right? The tilt up is 13 degrees into these cells. And the common thought there is we have this tilt up because if the bees are storing liquid, nectar, and things like that in the cells, that then it won't run out if it's tilted like that. That is a very practical solution. I mean, if you tilt your cup like this, you put liquid in it, you can retain some liquid, but if you go horizontal, the liquid potentially could run out. That's not why they think they did that, because here's what happens. When you tilt that 13 degrees and it goes this way, guess what it interacts with? The foundation of the comb, which is generally made by beeswax, but we just talked about the plastic one. And so it transmits 10% of the load to this center riser. And a lot of people might think that the side walls come together and they're directly opposite one another, but they don't. A greater economy is demonstrated because this load comes down here and transmits to this angle, transmits up to this angle, which meets this load coming down, which offsets that load transfer to that angle. Compression load, greater weight bearing by 10% because of the angles at 13 degrees, which is what the bees all build at. So then the next question is, if it's not tilted, what if it's upside down? Because we talked about that before. Better comb, which is pre-drawn beeswax cells, right? A lot of queens weren't taken to it because it was tilted upside down, but that's if the queens have an option to build onto something else or make brand new foundation. They'll make new or they'll use it that's oriented correctly first, but there is evidence that they will use even the downward tilted cells if there's nothing else for them to use. So the other thing is, we're thinking about all of this and they're all hexagonal cells, right? Is there any cell in the beehive that you can think of that does not follow this hexagonal load-bearing design, which is brilliant, by the way, on the part of the bees? Oh, look what's up here. This would be a queen cup. When you see a queen cup, right, they're along the bottom of the frame and they're always angled down, right? Are they hexagonal? No. They're cylindrical. They're like a half shell. They're like a hemisphere. And then, if they take that queen cup and the queen lays an egg in it, it becomes a queen cell. Then they build out the queen cell. When they build out the queen cell, do they build it straight out from the face of the comb? No. As soon as they get clear of the face of the comb, it droops down. If it's along the circumference or the perimeter of that frame, the queen cell is vertical. So they're building with gravity. And then what do? When you cut that thing open, it's not hexagonal, because they don't need it to transmit its energy or carry the load or share load-bearing capabilities from adjacent cells, right? Even though you get a bunch of queen cells along the foundation of your comb, the base of your frame, they're not butted right against one another. So like a bunch of bad craftsmen, right? We've all met these people. They have an engineering problem. They don't want to work out all the tensile, shear, and compressional load-bearing capabilities of the material they're working with. So what do? They just overbuild it. So look at these queen cells. When you see a queen cell that the bees favor, look at it. It's like a planter's peanut shell. It's round. And when you cut it away, it's not hexagonal inside. It's cylindrical. So they just overbuild it and they just glom everything onto it and they make it really big and they put little dimples all over it. And those dimples you would think could be fancy hexagonal dimples or something, but they're not. They're just little random dimples, but you want to see which one of these queen cells the bees favor the most. Look at the one they've contributed the most wax and modeling and shaping to. Now inside, it's a uniform cylinder, regardless of the outside and how it's all glommed. And what you're looking for, of course, if you're picking one to take care of that you want to see succeed, it'll be the largest, thickest, the one that they've given the most attention to. So that's the other thing, but it went with gravity, so they don't give a hoot about angles and all the other configurations, the hexagonal flat surfaces and everything that all feed off of one another. Tensile load distributed, compressional load distributed. It's brilliant. But if you flipped it sideways, would the bees still use that foundation? They would. And as they draw off from the foundation, they would, of course, orient it so the points of the hexagon are down and up. You would not see the flat across the bottom. So for those of you who have put your foundation in sideways, maybe you could share. Did they keep the flat side of the hexagonal cell on the bottom, or did they orient it so that they're pointed top and bottom, which is the best engineering design? But they've done other tests with these to see if they would even work inverted in cells, and they would. And that's, of course, when people were messing with them and giving the bees no options and cutting out sections of comb that's drawn and then putting it vertical to see if the bees would make a bunch of new comb or use existing comb. And even the queen would lay her eggs upside down. Can she even do that? We know she can, because she makes other queens that way with the queen cups that are pointed down. See, so we already know she can work against gravity. And I know we had a question a few weeks ago where somebody wanted to know if they changed the orientation and they already had pupa in there, would it harm the pupa to be changed as far as gravity orientation sideways, right? And I said that probably won't, because it should, if anything, it would be, the laying of the eggs and the feeding and stuff like that. But the bees will also, can they feed eggs that are upside down instead of down here in this 13-degree angle little base where the queen lays her little worker eggs? Could the queen lay an egg in the top like that, and would they be able to put royal jelly up around the egg and have it not just run out? They do it when they make a new queen. See, so that's already precedented, that's already established. It was really interesting though, and I know that that's a very brief presentation that I just gave, but you will not believe the rabbit hole I went down when I researched all that stuff, because I had lots of questions and lots of myths for me were defeated in today's research. So anyway, question number 6, Jay from New York. I've been wondering about bee space lately, particularly as it pertains to how bees transition between parts of a hive. When they enter a traditional Langstroth hive, do they walk along the bottom board, then up to the frames, or do they climb up the walls to get to the frames? What is the optimal gap size between the bottom of the frames and the screen bottom board? So we would say bottom board, screened or otherwise, it really wouldn't make a lot of difference. But as far as what the bees do when they get inside, those of you who stare at observation hives, beekeepers who stare at bees, you'll see that they come scooting in, and most of them, as soon as they get through the entrance, go right up the same wall that the entrance is on. So zipping right up that, they get good footing, it's got propolis and everything else on it, and then they cut out once they get to the level that they want to cut out into. And there are some, of course, that come across the bottom, and then they can go straight up into the frames, but 9 out of 10 of them are going to follow the surface of the interior of the entrance to the hive. So then once they get up there, then they go and they do their business, right? So the other question is, what about the space underneath? So here we've got the frame, here we've got the bottom board of the hive coming in. What's the optimum distance here? And for those of you who are sitting there wondering, what's bee space? It's 3/8 of an inch. So, and that was discovered by Lorenzo Langstroth. Anyway, so the space underneath, does that really matter? So here's one of the things that I've done a few years ago, is we look at the way the queen uses the cells and the way the bees draw out the comb on the bottom, which is generally your brood box. And does she draw her cells all the way out to the bottom here? Oftentimes they stop short. There's a bunch of unused cells embossed down here, but I put something underneath of that called a slatted rack, and that's a spacer. So that gives us 2 inches below the frames, and then now we have the bottom board below that. What's the result? The queen will now use the frames all the way down, and in fact some of them get carried away and they even build into the space below the slatted rack. But what we really want to do, if you want to know about optimum space underneath your frames, there really is no firm answer for that. And the reason I say that is, every time somebody does a cutout, every time somebody finds a feral colony of bees in a tree, I have questions that I want to know the answers to. One is, how many entrances did they have? How big was the entrance? What's the bottom of the hive like? What's the bottom of the interior space? Is it dirty? Is there a bunch of detritus down there? or is it clean as a whistle? Well, let me tell you, 9 times out of 10, midsummer, it's clean as a whistle. So they clean, they drag everything out of there. But there are also sometimes the bottom of natural comb, which is it's a nice radius as it gets to the bottom there. You'll see as much as 6 or 8 inches of space below that, and then you see an entrance down here. So the distance, the optimal difference between the bottom of the comb and the interior surface of your bottom board, for example, or your screen bottom board, whatever it happens to be, there's no set number for that because the bees will build closer to it. I would suspect in a warmer environment, they would use more of the space down towards the bottom. And in a cooler environment, you would see them using less of the space below wherever the entrance happens to be. Cool air will settle in here and stuff, and the bees control how much of that air they move up into their warmed, sheltered, ventless cavity. So there's no optimal gap between that. And so that answers those questions. Observation hives. Those things are great for seeing what bees do when they get inside. Now we're on to question number 7 from Honeybee. Interesting. Hoover, Alabama. If I have only one hive with very few workers, softball size, and a laying queen, what is the best way to rebuild the population quickly in winter? What should I feed? I need to build up the population to split and raise a backup queen. Hive is varroa treated, although Honeybee did not say how many varroa they counted when they did their counts after the treatment. And for example, last year the big freeze killed off most of the workers and left a tennis ball sized cluster with the queen. Temps are 70 degrees daytime and 28 to 34 degrees at night. I need a plan B hive. Yes, you do, because that colony is not great. And here's one of the things about it. How many bees? We mentioned earlier that they're eusocial insects, right? So eusocial means that there's a lot of different things going on, multi-generational workers inside that hive. We have 3 castes of bees. We have the queen, we have the drones, and we have the worker bees. And we need a lot of them to do all the tasks that must be done in the hive simultaneously. So that magic number was determined to be 5,000 or more bees. So a softball size cluster of bees, no matter where you are going into winter, is a terrible size cluster. So then the next thing a lot of people want to do is, I want to feed them, I want to boost them, I want to take care of those bees. I want those to be the bees I want to work from. Why do you want to work from those bees? And here's the reason I asked the question. They didn't do well on their own. You treat it for varroa, but we don't know what the varroa count was before. We don't know what the treatment was, and the varroa count afterwards, because the varroa late summer are the number one reason that your colonies start to dwindle and don't do well, because they passed on their diseases to the brood. The brood that's being reared at that point is going to help develop the brood that's going into winter, and they're dwindling. So we already have a colony genetically that's undesirable. So in my opinion, I would not be building up a softball-sized colony going into November and December as a resource to split from in spring, because already they're not cutting it wherever you happen to live, and in this case it's Hoover, Alabama. So that's why I don't often feel bad if I have an underachieving colony of bees and we just let them live out their life. Just let them finish off on their own. Now you can add them to another colony if you're sure that they're not bringing some kind of pathogens with them, because that's the other risk of it. But if we're in the same apiary, generally whatever they're sharing, they've kind of already shared with one another, but you have apparently a single colony of bees, so your options are few. But it doesn't mean you can't feed them. What I mentioned earlier on was the fondant that I put on there this year. That's emergency feed. Those bees are going to have troubles keeping the cluster warm while rearing brood, while feeding the fat-bodied wintered bees that are going to be needed to feed that developing brood that's coming along. And so even if you load them with everything that you think you can, what they're doing is they've already settled into a winter rhythm, which should mean a decline in brood population. So now we're talking about artificially stimulating the bees to rear brood and gain numbers. So you would have to, let's say we're going to do that. Let's say we just want to see if we can take a colony that's on the edge of the cliff, and we want to try to bring them back. So we don't care about genetics, and we don't care that they're not suited to where we live, and we just want to see as a project if we can bring these back. And I've done that before, so I'm not saying that it's a terrible idea, but it's a terrible idea to breed from them. So I would not make splits from that group. But you want to insulate the hive because they're going to have real problems generating warmth. And you're saying it's in the 70s, but what's the center of a cluster? What's that temperature? 94 to 97 degrees. So even when it's in the 70s outside, they're burning energy to warm the cluster where the brood, a tiny patch of brood, is probably in there right now. So we need to insulate them to take away as much of the effort that's expected of them to keep themselves warm, because then that frees them up to do other things. And as I mentioned earlier, if they're not generating a lot of heat and are working their rear ends off and consuming resources to do it, they're not burning their motors out. So because bees that have to generate a lot of heat on their own, when there's few of them, that means fewer of them are doing more work. If they're doing more work, they're not going to have the longevity that they otherwise would have had. So the carbohydrates are going to have to be there, fondant. The protein's going to have to be there. So here's the problem. It's the wrong time of year, but and the protein, the pollen patties that people put on have not been proven to be very good at building brood going into the winter. They have demonstrated that they're beneficial in building faster brood for bees in spring, because it's in addition to the fact that they're on the fringe of bringing in pollen already. So but if you're trying to hit them on all stops, tiny entrance, so we're talking 1.5 to 2 inch wide entrance because they're tiny. You want a 3/8 inch height to the opening. This is just if we were buddies and we're sitting down and you're like, hey Fred, I got this colony. I want to see if they can make it, just to see if they can make it. This is what I would tell you to do. You know, you might have other people tell you other things to do. So that tiny entrance, no upper entrance, no upper venting, insulation on the hive. And we've already got the fondant on there. And if I were, because of what we're testing, I would say get a fondant that has a proven track record. So find out which fondants were the best. And put that on there and reduce the space. So if it's a 10 frame colony, you can put inserts in your number 1 and your number 10 positions and reduce the space that they're occupying. So you can turn it into almost a nucleus sized hive. But since they're already resident to a box, let's take, if there are frames that are not full of honey, that are not capped, which I have to assume they don't have many stores saved up, because that's why they're in a pickle too. They're not very productive. So now we have to take away some of the dead space. So I recommend filling that with solid, what would be divider boards. So if you've got 2x10s around that you can cut down and slide them in there to create a smaller space for them to occupy. That's another thing that I would do. And if you have a screen bottom board or something like that, I would go to a solid bottom board and I would tilt it towards the landing board, towards the entrance. I would make sure that they are 18 inches off the ground and not in a damp space. And I would make sure that their entrance faces east by southeast to make use of any passive heat that the winter sun might provide. And I think that's it. And after that, let us know what you did, and let us know if you made it in spring. But I'm just going to say it again, that that's not a colony of bees that I would want to be reproducing from. So you would be requeening them later anyway, hoping to get better stock. Next one comes from Jennifer, Amherst, Massachusetts. I've recently noticed many bee abdomens on the landing board. I'm pretty sure it's too cold for wasps to be eating our bees, but it's not too cold for shrews to eat them. I've read that shrews eat the heads and thoraxes of the bees and they leave the abdomens behind. Could it be something besides a shrew? Any advice as to how to get rid of shrews? Okay, so here's what I do, and people tease me about it. Right in my own bee club, they tease me just because I have cameras on my beehives. They think it's overboard or something. So anyway, this is an Arlo camera. They don't make these anymore. This is the Arlo 2. It's discontinued or whatever, which is good because you can get them refurbished and you can get them from eBay and things like that. So anyway, I take these little Arlo cameras out there, and one of the things that's cool about them is they focus pretty close. So here's the entrance to your beehive. Here's your Arlo camera right here. In fact, put it 12 inches away from the landing board. And then what I do is they have a magnetic back to them. This one, by the way, is already broken. It doesn't work. It's garbage because I use them in a bad way. Put a post in the ground. Then they have these little magnetic little metal hemispheres that you mount to your post, and then you stick that on there, and then because it's spherical, you can change the angles, right? The reason I'm saying this is we can sit around and speculate. I wonder what's eating my bees. I wonder what is leaving nothing but abdomens there. Because the tiniest mammal, and by the way, shrews, there's a pygmy shrew in the north. I recently caught and made a video about the short-tailed shrew, which I like having around because it's after the mice and voles and things like that. Terrible appetites that they have. So the tiny shrew, the little pygmy shrew, could in fact be getting into the entrance of your hive. It could in fact be getting in there and eating your thoraxes because that's maximum protein, and these things need to eat like crazy. They need to constantly eat just to live, and they move like lightning. That's why you need to put some kind of motion detector camera. It doesn't have to be like an Arlo or something like that, which by the way you can check with your phone. But if you had game cameras, trail cameras, trail cam pros and stuff like that, they're standalone units. They sit out there, and what you want to look for, because we're after a tiny mammal. So in fact, I did a review years ago of the Nature Cam. And I'm writing that down because I'm going to put it in the link below. And it's because it's, I forget who makes it, but one of the big game cam companies makes it. But what's different about the Nature Cam is it has lenses on it that are fixed focal distance lenses, which means that you can put that thing really close, because that's what I was interested in, small mammal videos. So you can put that really close to the beehive, aim it directly at the entrance, and any movement, because they move wicked fast, you want a fast triggering trail camera or something like that. But that Nature Cam has the lenses that lets you either shoot a whole field if you want to, but what my personal interest was, getting right up there, and it has a little screen that plugs into it so you can position it and look at it and see exactly what's in focus and what you're going to see. And now we're going to find out, is there a shrew? Is there a house mouse? Is there something else getting in there that is warm-blooded? And if not, at least we're going to rule it out, and at least you'll have a cool piece of kit that you can use to look at your beehives, see what's going on. And let us know what you find out, by the way, because it could be a shrew would get in there and eat your bees. So then the entrance, that's where entrance reduction, that's how I arrived at my 3/8 inch high entrances, because I don't need mouse guards anymore. Because here in the state of Pennsylvania, we don't have that tiny pygmy shrew. The shrew that we have is one of the largest in the country, by the way. So that short-tailed shrew, it's never getting in there. House mouse, not even close. Deer mice, bigger than house mice, can't even get through the entrance. So a 3/8 inch high entrance, 1.5 inches, 2 inches wide, is not going to admit a mouse. But if I had a pygmy shrew, the possibility exists. So camera, get footage, and share it on YouTube. Question number 9 is from Dustin Peterson, and I can't even say the name of the place, but it's in California. Mokelumne. Anyway, I've been told that letting a colony requeen itself can often result in a more aggressive hive. Is this true? Okay. Can it result in a more aggressive hive? So if you let them requeen themselves, this is one of the things where if you're looking at beehives and you're a new beekeeper, people that have spent a lot of time staring at bees, people, like me, that you sit there and you go hive to hive and you're looking at them and you watch the landing boards, you see their behavior, see what's going on. Hives that are angsty sound different when you open them. They have a little whir. They're not too excited to have you there. This can change when they are queenless, or when there's something wrong with their queen, or they've just been superseded, or something's wrong. So the attitude of the hive can change depending on their queen's status. So that's one thing. You can get a feisty hive. I've had hives that were so jittery and jumpy, and they sent out their little guards as soon as you open the lid and everything else, and then I sat a queen cage on there with a laying queen in it, and as soon as they started checking that queen out, and as soon as they started trying to feed the queen, the whole hive just calmed right down in a matter of minutes. It was amazing, and I wish I'd been rolling a video camera when I did that. So the queen that they have does have an impact on the hive. Now, fast forward, let's say everything's queen right, you're going to, as it says here, letting a colony requeen itself. I do that all the time. I do walk-away splits. So I take the colony, I take a frame of eggs, I take a frame of brood, and I take nurse bees, and I start a new colony with it, and I walk away from it. So they take one of those eggs, they start to build queen cells around them, and they start feeding them royal jelly, copious amounts of royal jelly, and then they create their own queen cells, and they hatch their own queens. So would that have an impact on whether or not that colony with a new queen, once one of those hatches, would they be worse off? Because is that queen going to somehow be a troublemaker? Not really, because it's just the biology of the bees. The genetics of that queen come from the genetics of the queen that laid the egg. The other part of that is, and of course, that egg that she produced could be from any of a number of drones that she mated with also, right? So when she did her virgin flights, maybe there's the genetics of 20 different drones out there. So the queen stock, the drone stock, those contribute to the new queen that is being produced there. Now then, that queen hatches out, the one that they like. And she goes around and she chews little holes in the remaining queen cells, and she stings them. She kills them because she was the first one to come out of her queen cell. Then within a couple of weeks, she matures and she flies out and she mates with some drones in a drone congregation area. So there again, now we have all these unknown genetics in your area. So that alone, that activity, and those genetics that the queen interacts with when she mates with all those drones, she only needs to mate with 3, but she gets carried away and it's a huge party night and she mates with 20. So then she comes back and now she's got all the eggs that she's ever going to lay for the rest of her life. So we have sisters, full sisters in there. They're the daughters from the queen that are from the same drone. And then we have half sisters. They're all from the same queen, but some of them have different fathers, right? So some of those could have different attitudes. They could have, because if you're in an area, for example, although you are in California, so if they mate with drones from stock that's highly defensive, then you run the risk of having highly defensive progeny from that queen. But for the whole colony to turn like that, unless they came from a colony that was already troubled, that's why we pick queens that we like, that are productive, that are resistant, that don't leave us with a softball-sized cluster going into winter, that actually do a very good job. Then those are the ones we want them to make drones. We want their drones out mating with other queens, and we want her offspring to go out and, of course, carry on her genetics. So the activity in itself, standalone, if you let them make their own queens, can they often result in a more aggressive hive. That's if you're in an area where you have Africanized colonies or other highly defensive lines of bee stock that would be sending their drones up that would mate with your queen. Because it's her offspring that you're dealing with. The queen herself is a different story. So I hope that helped. Listening to them, seeing what the disposition is, everything else. So anyway, now we're at the end of it. That was the last question. So here's the fluff. Things I want you to know. Make sure that you're going to have some kind of emergency resource for your bees, even if the hive is loaded with honey and you've got 100 pounds on it, everything is great because they can let you down and they can confine themselves to a small column that just rises up through the hive, and they ignore a bunch of resources because you're going to hear the story all the time that my bees starved to death one frame over from a frame of solid capped honey. So what's directly above them and directly in the cluster is what really matters to the bees. So some kind of emergency feed on. Also, if those of you who are having these weird warm days now and you want to feed something to the foraging bees that are out there, it should not be something that they have to take back to the hive and dehydrate at all. So it should not have a high water content. So the only thing right now that I recommend you put out there would be something like Pro Sweet, because it's already inverted, and we talked about that earlier today. And it's 1-to-1. They don't have to dehydrate or anything else. So it's an immediate kind of replenishment of recently consumed honey in cells. And clear your entrances every single day. So we have this in the cover picture today. This is to scrape the snow away from the entrance, and this is to reach in and scoop out dead bees. Get every dead bee that you can reach all the way in there and scrape them out. The more you scrape out, the less your bees have to deal with. And we're keeping those entrances open. How often do you do it? Every single day. Because you're going to have die-offs this time of year, and we want those entrances open so the bees are not trapped inside, and so there's not a bunch of funky residue in there out of reach of your bees. If you've got flow hives and things like that, pull your trays, dump those, empty them frequently, or have your trays inverted. What else? Plan for spring, so make sure your equipment is there. We talked about the double screen board for helping to control swarming. So we have to think about being able to split. You can't split colonies, you can't catch swarms if you don't have boxes to put things in. So right now, so much of that gear is on sale. And I hope to see a lot of you at the Hive Life Conference in January in Tennessee. That's being orchestrated by Cayman Reynolds. So a lot of people are going there, and the reason I bring that up is because it falls in line with getting the equipment in line for spring, because you're going to save on shipping. And a lot of the distributors that are showing up there, bee equipment manufacturers and sales representatives, are going to be there. And you'll be able to save on shipping, plus get your stuff at a discount, and be ready for spring. And for those of you who are brand new to beekeeping, who are planning on 2022 being your first year of beekeeping, get your orders in right now, because there's nothing more disappointing than to wait until May or June and suddenly you make the decision, I'm going to keep bees, so I'm going to find out who's got a good package of bees, who's got a good nucleus of bees that I can get. If you can source them locally from somebody that you know has a stellar reputation in clean stock, good performing, well adapted to your area, you're way ahead. Otherwise, you end up ordering through companies like Man Lake. There's a bunch of, just do searches, read all the reviews, make sure that you're getting the stock that you want, but get your orders in now, because if you wait until spring, there's a good chance it could be out of stock and you could be out of bees, and then you're one of those people that's begging for a swarm to get started. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do that, but the only guarantees are, of course, the bees that you buy. So get with a local bee breeder. Maybe your mentor has a bunch of extra bees that they're going to come out of winter with, and those will be locally adapted. So your first choices, good stock local. Second choice, reputable breeders and dealers of package and nucleus colonies. Those that ship through the mail are going to be the packages. Usually if it's a nucleus colony, which are the fastest buildups you can get, you'll have to drive to pick those up in person. So, thank you for being here with me today. I hope that you might have learned something and you don't feel like you wasted your time. And I hope you have a great week ahead and enjoy the warm-up for those of you who are in the northeastern United States. Thanks for being here. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.